where the dangers are double, the Blackhawk sinkhole and other karstic sinkholes of South Dakota.
By Adam Weaver
and Carl Emanuel of the Pahasapa Grotto. Photos by Nick Anderson and Dan Austin. There's the two of us right there.
At the sinkhole.
The Black Hills has a lot of karst features in it. In the past, we didn't realize there was as many as it turns out to be. We've got a lot of new technology helping us. Currently, we know there's over 400 known caves. There's two of the world's largest caves and many, many other substantial and geologically significant examples. A lot of the dots on this map indicate clusters of caves, and you can see that most of them are concentrated around the periphery of the uplift. The four most significant karst-bearing formations in the region, in order of abundance, are the Madison, the Pahasapa limestone, the Minnelusa, which has limestone and gypsum layers, the Minnetonka limestone, and the Spearfish Formation within the gypsum layers there within. Few of the caves occurring in the Spearfish Formation are shown on the adjacent map. They're just not well documented at all, but there's a lot of them out there. Sinkholes and other karstic features abound within the formation wherever we've looked at it. It's doubtless that many undocumented caves exist.
Okay, so the sinkhole story, which is what many of you have probably already seen in the news and Facebook and other places. And part of the story is that gypsum layer that Carl just talked about, because there are so many of these sinkholes in that layer. So when the sinkhole thing started for us, it was in the news, and there was a sinkhole in Blackhawk in this community, and I saw that because I get the news every day at work, and thought, oh yeah, there's a sinkhole in gypsum. Okay, that's not a big deal. Then the next day, the second sinkhole was in the news. There were two then, and I thought, well, this might be interesting because there's two pretty big sinkholes close together. So I called Doug Huntrods at the emergency management for Meade County office, and it kind of said, hey, what are you guys going to do about this? And at that point, he didn't know, and they weren't even sure what it was, which made me pretty excited because I thought, oh, they don't know. And I offered to him that the Pahasapa Grotto of the NSS could probably assess this sinkhole safely, because that's the kind of work that we do with karst features. And he agreed. So later that day, Dave Brinketti, Nick Anderson, and myself went out there. And we found two pretty big sinkholes, to be sure. The one on the left of this slide has a truck bumper in it, and it's right up against the basement of a house. And the other one, obviously, is by the street in front of a house. And we'll see a bunch more pictures of the larger sinkhole, because that's our entry point into this site. So I go to make the assessment, and I show up, and there's a nice gentleman named John there, and it's in his yard, and he tells us we need to park our car farther away because the street's been buckling. And we do that, and he's a very friendly guy, and we explained to him what kind of group we were and that we had permission to be there. And then we looked for quite a while to find somewhere we could rig the rope to, because we didn't know how stable it was. We weren't sure if it was in active collapse or not. And then I eventually went down a little ways. And when I got down there, I could see 80 feet into a room. And I shot a laser across it, and I was like, wow, this is really big. But the sidewalk, as you can see in this picture, was completely overhanging my head, and part of the street was. And so when I came back out, I told Doug, I think we can go in there, and that's not a problem. But if we could take the sidewalk off, because it was cracked all the way through and kind of weirded me out, I'd feel a lot better. So they brought this machine in there, and they broke it after trying to use that hammer you can see in the picture right here several times without it working. So the fire department was super helpful with that. And so when we finally got in there that day, I went from hoping to find a new discovery, a new gypsum cave, to being like immediately, oh no, it's a big mine. And there were like mining timbers in there, and there was a lot of drill holes and some other debris from the mining. And so at this point, Nick and Dave and myself made a very quick 500-foot long sketch map of the mine, and then took it back to the surface to show them, because those guys didn't know how long we were going to be in there, so we had to kind of hurry before they would get worried that we got hurt in there. So we told the homeowners that had kind of come at that point we'd be back with full mapping teams the next day after work. So the next day, I put on here, the circus came to town. The next day we showed up, and there were the full fire department was there, a whole bunch of search and rescue people were there. There were geologists from different agencies there with maps, and all the homeowners from the whole community were there. There were 100 or so people, and we brought 3 teams of people there to make the map, and they gave us some food and drinks, and everyone was excited that we were there because they all had been wondering what this was, right? So we finally had told them it's a mine, and before that, and it gave some of them peace of mind because before that they were just living in worry with what it could possibly be, So here I have listed the teams for that second day were at the mine. Dan Austin, of course, took most of the fantastic photos you're going to see from this point on in the slideshow. Myself, Chris Pelzarski, the chairman of the Pasa Grotto, Renee Ohms led the second team, who mapped towards the water with Dave Springhetti and Nick on their team. And then Carl Emanuel, who is giving this presentation today, led the geology team looking at the structure of the mine and trying to figure out kind of what was going on with that portion of it.
As well as whether or not there was dangerous gases and everything.
Right, yes.
Yep. Okay,
so once we got in the mine, obviously you can see it's very large, and there's a number of very large tunnels, and we ended up mapping 2,500 feet or so of mine tunnel, but most of it being between 8 and 14 feet high, and every once in a while, like I said, there'd be a mining timber, but there weren't very many, and most of them were in a big pile. I think from when they originally were mining the 20s and they decommissioned the mine, they probably thought this would make it fall in at that point, but it did not, removing the things. And this is Ken Stankin standing next to one of those that are still left standing. You can also see in this, it's pretty wide. The mine, it ranges from 60 feet wide to 150 feet wide, and about 650 feet long in the extent of that we can map. And you can see in this picture and in other pictures, there's a lot of these drill marks on the walls. And then here's the big thing that everyone thought was very exciting. This is Chris standing next to the 1950s Ford car that was in the mine. There were a number of places where there had been sinkholes in the past. This one obviously was in the 50s, and people would fill them back in and then go on about their business. In the 50s, this site was a cow pasture, right? So obviously this farmer had a car he didn't want, and there was a sinkhole, and he used it to help fill in the sinkhole. We also found some infant cow bones where a cow fell in the sinkhole, which might have led to them filling it in at that point before the houses were even there. Here's a picture of all the timbers piled up that they took down when they tried to close the mine. This is me standing next to the water. You can't see in this picture, but this water actually had like a handcart track in it, and the mine continues to the east past this wall, but it's sunk with water. And many people have asked to go in there and try to go through that water, and it's just not really something that seems reasonable to do because it's incredibly murky, full of silt, and the gases in the water are completely unknown at this point. So, but the mine does continue to the east behind me in this photo. It's one of the places we couldn't get to. The other places that we could not get to are these debris cones. So there were passages, as you can see in the picture on the right here, that were completely blocked by a debris cone where it collapsed the tunnel. And we didn't try to dig through them because it's obviously very unstable. But the mine continues past these places. So we have an incomplete map of the mine, and there's no known map of the actual mine itself from when it was open. The picture on the left here is an interesting place because it's a place where I think the next sinkhole will probably form because it's a 30-foot tall dome in the mine that comes within 5 feet of the surface. This one in this picture is actually under someone's driveway to their house. So it's a pretty crazy place to be. There's another one of these big domes that go up really close to the surface in this neighborhood. And like I said, I can't imagine trying to live there with that bully your house. Like I said, so we went there to map the mine. The purpose was to show the people that lived there whose houses were over mine tunnels and whose weren't as accurately as possible, which went along with mapping all the pillars, right? So obviously, if your house is on a pillar, that's less worrisome than if it's over a 30-foot void. So we completed this in about 4.5 hours with essentially 2 teams mapping, and then we left and we went back up to the surface. And the homeowners were incredibly anxious to get this data, as you can imagine. So this was our first map that I was able to give to them, and I gave it to them the very next morning. And this is just obviously a compass file overlaid on that neighborhood. And so you can see there's a number of houses that the mine is under in this photo. And this gave a lot of people more of a reason to leave their homes, because there were a lot of people who had said, I don't think this is really a problem, I'm going to stay in my house. And obviously after this they said, oh, okay, my whole house is over the mine. And then within 24 hours after exiting the mine, Derek Wolf from Colorado had finished the final map for them, and we eventually overlaid this over the aerial. But yeah, so this map shows kind of the extent, and we named it the Hideaway Mine because the Hideaway subdivision is the name of the subdivision the houses are called. So it was a pretty amazing thing, I thought, that Derek could make the map this nice and this fast, and I thank him for that, and all the homeowners are really grateful for that. Okay, so the current status, the top picture of this is a sinkhole as we found it, and the bottom picture is last week, so which at this point would be June 22nd. So you can see it is tripled in size. There's a huge, as you can imagine, $75 million lawsuit ongoing with a number of homeowners and a number of different government and private entities that had dealings with getting these houses built on top of the mine. And in the future, we expect that there's going to be some additional areas in this neighborhood that have similar issues to the south and east, particularly. So I don't know if the cavers will get called back in to map that, but I mean, we would assess it and be, I guess, willing to if it seems safe to us. So anyway, I'm going to move here, and now we're going to get on to some real exploration that Carl's been doing that also has to deal with our local area and these gypsum sinkholes, because it's pretty neat stuff, and this is actual cave stuff. So.
Yeah, we got skunked, but so we have to move on to something else. That we thought we had a cave, we didn't, but we found out a lot about the nature of the gypsum in the area, which is kind of cool. Anyway, I've been working on a series of sinkhole evaluations of the hills. We recently got access to LiDAR data, and we've been wanting it for years, and we're one of the last places in the nation to actually get this stuff. And I've been doing an awful lot of work with that, and I've been identifying just literally thousands of sinkholes in areas that we never knew they existed. And one of the big areas we're finding them in is in this gypsum horizon, which the Hideaway Mine was the old underground gypsum mine back in the 20s, but it's following the same beds that that we see sinkholes developing in all over the place. Now, I didn't just look at gypsum sinkholes. I've been looking at sinkholes pretty much across the board, but the amazing part was the number we found in the gypsum horizons. So having never done this before, I developed a test area to look, see how LiDAR would identify a known Karst-related sinkhole. And it kind of shows on the map here. Now, the background there just shows the area that we had LiDAR for at the time that I started this project, but I currently now have it expanded much to the north and much to the east, or the right-hand side of the image up there. So there's quite a bit more data, but we don't have any to the south and any to the west at this point because it's just not available yet. It should be within a year or so. This view contains a an area where there's a large cave that we knew about quite well, and but we found some interesting things. For one thing, we knew that there was a sinkhole there, but if you look, you can see another little sinkhole right next to it. And I used a number of techniques. I used hillshade modeling. I used sub-meter contouring. All of this developed off of DEMs, and then I also used what's called a fill model. And a fill model is something that you can do within a number of different programs. I used ArcGIS, but what it does is it takes the surface, models the surface, and finds all the areas that are below grade and fills them in. And it shows you where sinkholes, both man-made and natural, are. So you have to go out and verify what type of sink you have, but it does give you the locations quite accurately. This shows the contouring in the area, and this is a sub-meter contour. This particular one, I believe, is 2/3 of a meter, and it just gives you a lot of evidence for finding holes in sinks in the ground. The one thing that we noticed in this area was a big loop in here, which we did not know existed, where that second little sinkhole is. Next image shows the fill model, which is basically graded from 0 to about 10 meters. I use 10 meters typically because it filters out such things as canyons that are on the edge of your map. If you have a canyon on the edge of the map, it can be modeled as a very big sink. But what we found was that there was a big sinkhole. Not very deep, only about a meter deep in this area up in here, and a very deep sinkhole here. Now this particular cave is 300 to 400 feet long as currently mapped. We're currently doing a redo in the area, and it looks to be significantly larger with a lot of air moving in it. So it's a pretty cool place. There's a lot of other sinks in the area, but they're all along roads, or they're related to prospect pits. And so anyway, it was a good area to take a look at and see what a real sinkhole looks like using these methodologies. And these little, everything that's on there, basically I have a little symbol which I put around where the sinkholes are, and there's a triangle symbol around where they're what I call borrow pits along roads. But I also found up in the upper right-hand corner, I found an arcuate collapse, which wasn't a sink because it was open on one end, but which looks to be an eroded sinkhole that's on the edge of a cliff. So there's quite a bit of karst activity in this area, a lot more than we ever really thought was. We knew there was caves, but there wasn't a lot of sinkhole type evidence. But turns out there's a whole lot more than we thought. This is an area very close by, actually, where there's a second big cave, and it's pretty easy to see. It's down in the corner in here. This is a hillshade model. But there's other little pits and other things over in here, but these have rims around them, so those are prospect pits. This is a meter contouring here, 2/3 of a meter, and you can see that it just puts bullseyes around a lot of different structures in the area, but particularly these two spots down here. And there it is right in there. And this is a fairly decent sized cave. It's an ice cave, year round, 32 degrees. It's got 500 plus feet of passageways in it, and it's open in a few areas and some air moving, so we're probably going to do some more work in this area. But it was a good test site. And there's my symbology again, which probably don't need to look at. Okay, so the results of my initial sinkhole inventory, looking at all the rock types in the northern hills, turned out an amazing number of sinkholes. Now the ones shown in this particular picture are quite large. If you can see down in the lower right hand side, there's a car on the highway there. These are two huge sinkholes, which I identified from aerial photos. This is in an area where we do not have LiDAR, but where just based on aerial photos within a 2 square mile area, I found 60 sinkholes. So I've been doing a lot of inventory in this area, and I can see that we've got a lot of work to do, but it's exciting because we're finding places that are likely to have caves. So this shows all the sinkholes, all the different areas, and at the time I did this, which is a couple of months ago, I had 1,873 total sinkholes. I've done some work since, and I have it up above 2,500. But it just shows you that there's some very large clusters of sinkholes in areas that we did not realize we had sinks. Around the periphery and the rocks that are green, that's where the gypsum is. And there are some extremely large concentrations in those gypsum horizons. This is by rock type, the Madison limestone, which is where all the big caves are. I found 687 sinkholes in the Northern Hills. In the Northern Hills, prior to this survey, we knew of 6 sinkholes. So this is a big increase. And some of these things are quite large, but they're hard to find out in the woods. They really are. That's difficult terrain, and they're really easy to miss because I've looked for some and walked right by them and missed them. This is the Minnelusa Formation, which again is a limestone. There's 300 some odd occurrences in here. This is Minnetonka limestone, and the only real reason that we're not seeing more of the Minnetonka is that the LIDAR doesn't extend into the areas where most of the Minnetonka is. But this is, and so this is the area showing the sinkholes that I found within the gypsum formations. And there's a huge cluster on the northern end of the hills that we knew some of those were up there. We had no idea there was that many. So I'm going to go through pretty quick and show you just a few examples of places that I found large clusters of holes. And then I'll get to the gypsum area right at the these are some of the areas we looked at. Very little of it has been evaluated at this point. I've looked at less than 35% of the data, and I've already found 2,500 sinkholes. So enough said there. We have no information in Wyoming, and we have no information south of the east-west line on the bottom of this pattern. The first area I'm going to talk about is my test area. This first one I looked at after finding that I could identify sinkholes, where I knew there was an existing sinkhole and I had reports of 2 others, and I found a cluster of 58 of them in a rock type which does not typically have a lot of sinkholes in it. It has karst, but not a lot of sinkholes. This is an area where I spent literally half a day looking for a reported cave. Turned out to be in one of these pits. But I wandered around in the woods for 3 to 4 hours before I actually found any sinkhole. And turned out that there was a whole lot more than one there. This is the fill data. The second deepest, the one in here, is where the known cave is. But I have not been out to look at these yet, but I have been to series of these very close by and have found a whole series of caves. This is just a little bit to the west. You can see a whole series of dings in here. Every one of the big dings in here has a cave in the bottom of it. One was known about. It turns out that I found out from some grotto members that one had been reported, but the others were unknowns. You can see here there's a fairly good sized hole down in the bottom of one of these ravines. And it's as much as 5 to 6 meters deep. It's a big collapse. This is the whole area where I found the 50 holes. And this is my symbology, and it's showing that instead of the 1 cave, perhaps 2 that were reported in the area, there's a total of 7 caves in here, and we haven't looked at all the sinkholes yet. So it's a great way to identify areas to target, to do some ridge walking. Northwest slope area, this was a total surprise to all of us. There's 2 clusters of sinkholes, one of 150 in one small area, another of 250, and the whole surrounding area has several hundred more. So there's a total of 650 sinkholes in this area, and it butts right up against the state line. So we really don't know how many other sinkholes are out in this area. This kind of shows it from a distance, but you can see there's a cluster here and a cluster here, and those are the 2 clusters I was referring to. There's some structural trends showing up in here, but we'll go past that for now. This is just one area that has about 150 sinkholes in it, and you can't see much there when I show the fill model, but when I put the symbology over the top, you can see that there's a whole cluster of these things, and there's approximately 60 identified sinkholes in this one area, and that there's definitely structural trends with them. None of these were known before, and there are no known caves in the area, but I haven't had a chance to get out to start to look. I've seen in some aerials some dark holes in the bottoms of some of these. This is another nearby area. Shows a series of very deep sinkholes. This whole area is basically a perched water table. There's water bleeding out all over the place. So there's a lot of karst going on in here. Some of these are quite deep. They're up to 3 and 4 meters deep, and as much as 30 meters across in some areas. Again, this just shows my symbology, so we'll keep going. This is a little bit closer view, which is a lot cooler because it shows, you can see down in there's a hole in the bottom of that one. And there's probably a hole in the bottom of this one. I've gone out and looked at this, and I think with a little bit of digging, you might be able to get access in here. But there's also some what appear to be collapsed channels over in this area and possibly up in here. So there's a karst system in here, and it's pretty cool stuff. That's the, again, looking at the fill model. And we'll go past that. This is just one more cluster of a whole series of clusters. This is one which is kind of interesting. 2 major sinkholes, but if you look close, there's all kinds of tiny ones. And when you start, this is the fill model. You can see the area is just basically modeled, and there's a very large sink over in this area in here. So, it's a really useful series of tools. This is heavily wooded areas, and so it's difficult to find this stuff. Just wandering around, you can walk right past it and never see it. Another area here, just kind of my symbology again and my sinks. This area up in here is a man-made sink, which is basically a water tank, but there's just a whole series of these sinkholes all along the drainage in this area. Now, there is a cluster of over 470 sinkholes in this area up in here, which I call the La Flamme area, which is the name of a structure that used to run in the area. Now, this is just a little bit closer. This is in the gypsum, and this is how densely karst developed these areas. Or the anticline comes up through here. You've got all this karst developed, and some of these are high volume springs, producing hundreds of gallons per minute, coming up with water which has the chemistry that we know it's coming out of the Madison Formation 1,000 feet below. But basically, there's water just weeping onto the surface in this area, and there's all kinds of karst development. This is one area that just looks like a Swiss cheese. It's got so many potholes in it, and this is the model in here is almost so dense you can't even see the individual structures in here, but these are all sinkholes, and most of them are upwards of this particular area has some very deep ones, and most of these are anywhere from 1 to 4 meters deep, and with a few that are as deep as 10 meters. It's just This is an aerial of one of the areas that I sent to Adam and a couple of other folks out to check and see if some of my data was showing true with sinkholes. And this is the model here. And you can see there's just some major sinks in this area. And it turns out that, yes, you can go from one sinkhole to the next, according to the owner of this property. And there's quite a gypsum cave underneath a portion of this person's property. These are some deep ones here. These things are up to 10 meters deep in a couple of spots. Anyway, that's my symbology again. Here's another area close by. Not a lot of cover in this area, but again, lots and lots of potholes. Again, you can fill them in and you can find out where those potholes are and get an approximate depth on them, which is usually an underestimate. And we code them, and then we go out and take a look at them. And so far, most of the ones we've gone out and looked at have had some cave developments within them. So we're really hopeful that we're going to find a lot of caves. Well, that's all, folks. If you got any questions, email us. You can email Adam, I should say, at adam@caves.org, or myself, Carl, at lpgandmc@gmail.com. And thanks for listening.
All right.